The views expressed here are solely those of the host and do not represent the positions of any sponsors, affiliates, or institutions. I Don't Subscribe does not serve as a medium for salvation, leadership, or advocacy on behalf of others. An individual's internal compass is their most reliable guide. These conversations serve as waypoints along one's journey. For this reason, I encourage listeners to critically examine all narratives presented, including those on this show. An individual journey is uniquely theirs, and it should be navigated with confidence and intuition. Retain what resonates, release what does not. Let's converse. What's good with you? How you feeling today? Welcome back to I Don't Subscribe with yours truly, Ibrahim Dafe. To all of the regular listeners, I want to say thank you for returning for another episode. And if this is your first time tuning in, I'm glad you found us, you dig? Because this is the show where the two ACEs, adverse childhood experience, as well as adverse community environment, meet a conversation that meets life lessons, that meets story time. Now, each episode aims to unpack the invisible backpack of traumatic experiences many carry. More importantly, this platform challenges conventional wisdom and explores unexpected pathways to success and transformation. Now, today, we are diving pause into something powerful, how adaptation forged in adversity transforms into a strategic edge in high-stakes environment. Last week, we explored how survival wiring becomes a strategic advantage through resilience. Today, we are taking that foundation deeper. Pause. Examining how these adaptations manifest as specific leadership superpowers in the moments that matter most. Now, the scenarios I shared today represent composite patterns observed across multiple executive journeys, while the specific details have been altered to protect confidentiality. The underlying leadership patterns remain intact. You dig? Now, I would like for you to imagine an executive steps into a silent elevator heading to a boardroom where the stakes are high and the air is thick. Pause. With tension, scanning faces, sensing undercurrents. This leader knows who's aligned, who's anxious, and who's ready to bolt like Usain before a word is spoken. Now, is this intuition? Or is it the byproduct of a brain conditioned by adversity? Growing up between Freetown and the South Bronx, I witnessed how people navigated challenging environments, developed an almost supernatural ability to read situations. They can anticipate problems and pivot strategies with remarkable speed. These weren't just survival tactics, they were sophisticated neural adaptations that, when properly channeled, became extraordinary assets in professional context. Today's conversation moves beyond resilience into strategic application. Let's decode the silent language of boardroom survival and discover how adaptation becomes advantageous in the moments that matter most. But first, we must pay our bills and hear a quick word from our sponsor, because this episode is powered by House of Lone Wolf, where adversity becomes the executive's secret advantage. For organizations tired of theory and hungry for results, consider houseoflonewolf.com. That is houseoflonewolf.com. Now let's get back to our conversation. Have you ever noticed how some leaders possess an almost supernatural ability to read rooms? They can navigate complex interpersonal dynamics and make decisions with remarkable precision under extreme pressure. While others might attribute this to natural charisma or innate talent, there's often something more profound at work. Neurological adaptation forged through adversity. Now, let me tell you about someone I call Malik. Malik grew up in the foster care system, bounced between different homes before he even turned 16. In each new environment, he had to quickly assess who was safe, who held power, and what unspoken rules governed in each household. His survival literally depended on his ability to read micro expressions, detect subtle shifts in emotional temperature, and navigate complex interpersonal dynamics before words were even exchanged. Now, today, Malik founded a technology company valued over 200 million. When asked about his most valuable leadership skill, his answer was revealing. I can walk into any boardroom and within 90 seconds know exactly where everyone stands. Who's aligned with the proposal? Who's skeptical? Who's planning to derail the conversation? And who's keeping their options open? What others might call a gut feeling is the product of 1,000 silent calculations happening automatically. What Malik described isn't magic or mystical intuition. It is the legacy of survival because his brain developed extraordinary pattern recognition systems, which are now serving him in corporate contexts. This is the hidden wiring of advantage neural adaptations that, when properly channeled, become remarkable strategic assets. Dr. A. McLaughlin, professor of psychology at Harvard University, she suggested that repeated adaptation to stress in early life may enhance a person's sensitivity to social cues and threat detection systems. Dr. McLaughlin's work is just one of many frameworks exploring how adversity can shape social and emotional skills in ways that, when properly directed, become powerful assets. Let's bring another story. I call him Patrice, a CFO for a multinational corporation. Patrice grew up as the eldest son in a large immigrant family facing significant financial constraints. From an early age, he learned to negotiate peace between siblings, anticipate family needs before crisis, and pivot strategies when resources suddenly become unavailable. Patrice navigate complex mergers and acquisition with an uncanny sense of timing and empathy. During a recent hostile takeover attempt, he identified psychological leverage points and communication patterns that others miss entirely. What appeared as brilliant strategic insight was the application of skills developed during childhood when navigating complex family dynamics wasn't optional. It was essential. Growing up, I was constantly standing for subtle shifts in the family ecosystem. He said, now I do the same in boardrooms. The difference is that now I understand why I see patterns others miss. And I've learned to channel that perception strategically rather than reactively. This is the critical distinction. What begins as unconscious adaptation can be transformed into conscious advantage through awareness and intentional application. Without this awareness, these same adaptations often operate as liabilities. Think about it. Hypervigilance becomes anxiety. Self-reliance become what? An inability to delegate. And rapid decision making becomes impulsiveness. Another example comes from someone I call Jason. Jason grew up in a neighborhood where violence was common. He developed an extraordinary ability to detect potential threats before they materialize. He could sense tension building on a street corner or identify subtle changes in crowd dynamics that signal impending conflict. But today, Jason runs security operation for major international events. Others perceive his childhood adaptation operating in a new context as an almost supernatural threat detection. I don't have to think about it. My body registers danger before my conscious mind catches up, he explained one day. The difference now is that I understand this mechanism and can direct it productively rather than being controlled by it. Some will call this adaptation recognition, the first step in transforming unconscious survival wiring into strategic advantage. Without this recognition, one may remain at the mercy of their adaptation rather than directing them purposefully. So now let's pull back the curtain and examine the neuroscience behind these adaptations. How exactly does adversity shape the brain in ways that later translate into strategic advantages? Most importantly, how can anyone, regardless of background, recognize and leverage their unique adaptation? The science behind these adaptations to advantage patterns is fascinating. So I would like to explore the neurological foundation while keeping the conversation accessible and yet practical. You dig? According to Dr. Bruce Perry, a leading developmental neuroscientist, in his work theorized that individuals who experience chronic unpredictability in childhood often develop a heightened attunement to nonverbal cues. This is one of several perspectives in the growing trauma and resilience research field. For someone like Malik, his brain developed highly efficient neural pathways for processing subtle facial expressions, body language, and vocal tone variations, skills that now allow him to read boardroom dynamics with extraordinary precision. According to Dr. Perry's research, he suggests that this happens because the brain is incredibly adaptive, especially during development. When specific skills become essential for security or belonging, the brain allocate disproportionate resources to those functions. It's not unlike how a person who loses sight often develops what? Enhanced hearing. The brain reallocate resources to where they are most needed. According to the study published in the Journal of Applied Psychology, also suggests among several interpretations that early exposure to high-stake environment may help wire the brain for rapid scenario analysis. This research examined how leaders respond to crisis and found that those who had navigated significant adversity in their personal histories often demonstrated superior ability to generate and evaluate multiple potential outcomes simultaneously. So you see, this relates directly to what neuroscientists are calling cognitive flexibility, the mental ability to switch between thinking about two different concepts or to think about multiple concepts simultaneously. For someone like Patrice, whose childhood required constant adaptation to changing family circumstances, his brain developed enhanced neural pathways for scenario planning and resource allocation skills that now serve him in complex financial negotiations. According to Dr. James Siegel, clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA, proposed in his research that adaptive communicators, often those shaped by early adversity, could shift their communication style and strategy in real time based on the feedback from their environment. Dr. Siegel's work in interpersonal neurobiology is one of many perspectives on how childhood experience can shape communication skills. This research explains why some leaders demonstrate remarkable communication agility, seamlessly shifting between different tones, approaches, and strategies based on the moment's needs. It's not just talent or training, but their brain's adaptive response to environments where communication flexibility is essential for well being. A key concept across these research perspectives is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. This means that even when adaptation begin as protective mechanism, they can be intentionally redirected toward constructive applications. This is critical for understanding how adaptation becomes an advantage. Dr. Stephen Porges, Polyvagal theory provides additional insight into these adaptation patterns. His research demonstrates how an individual autonomic nervous system develops different response patterns based on environmental conditions. Individuals who grew up in challenging environment often develop remarkably sensitive nervous systems that can detect subtle ecological changes. Potential liability in some contexts, but an extraordinary strength in situations requiring precise situational awareness. Other research suggests that adversity can sometimes, though not always, enhance specific aspects of empathy, particularly components related to recognizing others' emotional states. This may explain why some leaders who've navigated difficult circumstances would demonstrate exceptional emotional intelligence in professional contexts. It's important to note these adaptations don't happen uniformly. Not everyone who experienced adversity developed these specific adaptations, and the relationship between adversity and adaptation is complex, influenced by numerous factors including genetics, timing, severity, support systems, and individual differences. Crucial insight from this research isn't that adversity is beneficial, but that adaptation developed through adversity can become remarkable assets in leadership contexts when properly recognized and redirected. So, consciously directing them towards strategic objectives. So, now that we understand the science, let's examine the three key levers that transform adaptation into strategic advantage. These represent the core capacity often developed through adversity and can become exceptional leadership assets when properly channeled. The first lever is hyper-attunement, the ability to rapidly process subtle interpersonal and environmental cues that others miss entirely. You see, this goes beyond basic emotional intelligence. It's an enhanced capacity to detect micro expressions, slight shifts in group dynamics, unspoken tensions, and potentially alignments or conflict before they become explicit. Consider Malik, whose foster care experience required him to assess new environments for safety quickly. His brain developed extraordinary sensitivity to nonverbal communication, facial microexpressions, tone variations, body language shifts, and group dynamics. In boardroom contexts, this allows him to detect when someone withholds information, when consensus is forming, or when resistance is building, all before others notice at times. The key to leveraging hyper-attunement is intentional focus. Many people with this adaptation don't realize they possess it. They might call it gut feeling or intuition, and they're not wrong. But when recognized, it can be consciously directed towards specific objectives. Consider this essential question: what particular cues am I detecting? How can I systematically apply these perceptions in strategic context? How can I validate these perceptions against objective information? For example, Malik now purposefully arrives early to essential meetings to observe interactions before formal discussions begin. He's developed a personal system for documenting subtle cues and testing his perceptions against outcomes, transforming intuitive understanding into strategic methodology. This capacity explains why some leaders seem to have eyes in the back of their heads. They are processing thousands of data points, while others miss entirely. It creates a remarkable strategic advantage in team leadership and in crisis management when consciously directed. However, without awareness, the same capacity often creates anxiety and hypervigilance as the brain continues scanning for threats even in safe environments. The second lever is rapid scenario mapping, the ability to simultaneously generate, evaluate, and select from multiple potential futures. This goes beyond basic planning. It's an enhanced capacity to anticipate consequences, identify contingencies, and prepare for various outcomes simultaneously. Research suggests that individuals who navigate unpredictable environments often develop more efficient neural pathways for scenario planning. Their brains become adept at quickly asking, what if, and generating adaptive responses, a literal survival mechanism that can become an extraordinary strategic asset. Consider Patrice, whose childhood required constant adaptation to shifting family resources and needs. His brain developed remarkable efficiency at generating multiple scenarios and quickly identifying the most viable option. This capacity in corporate context allows him to anticipate market shifts, prepare for negotiation contingencies, and develop robust strategic plans that account for multiple possible futures. The key to leveraging rapid scenario mapping is a structured application. When people with this adaptation use it reactively, responding quickly to emerging problems. But however, when it's recognized, it can be proactively applied to strategic planning. That's why one must consider these questions. How can this capacity be systematically applied to upcoming decisions? How can scenario maps be effectively documented and shared with others? How can both best case and worst case possibilities be simultaneously held? For example, Patrice now dedicates specific time before major decisions to systematically map potential scenarios, documenting not just the obvious outcomes, but also the subtle consequences and second order effect others might just miss. He's transformed an intuitive process into a rigorous methodology that enhances his team's strategic planning. This capacity explains why some leaders demonstrate remarkable foresight and rarely seem surprised by emerging developments. Their brains constantly run simulations and prepare contingencies that others haven't considered. This creates significant advantages in strategic planning, risk management, and innovation when consciously directed. However, without awareness, the same capacity often generates anxiety as the mind constantly worries about what might go wrong. The third level is adaptive communication, the ability to shift communication style, the tone, and the strategy in real time based on environmental feedback. This goes beyond basic communication skills. It's an enhanced capacity to connect with diverse individuals, navigate complex interpersonal dynamics, and pivot approaches based on real time feedback. Consider Jason, whose childhood in a volatile neighborhood required him to communicate effectively with diverse people in constantly changing circumstances. His brain developed extraordinary flexibility in communication, allowing him to rapidly adjust his approach based on who he was talking to and what the situation required. In professional context, this capacity will enable him to build rapport with diverse stakeholders, navigate tense negotiations, and effectively lead teams through complex changes. That's why he said he can walk into any room with executives, security personnel, and technical staff and instinctively shift his communication approach with each person while maintaining authenticity. It's not manipulation, it's adaptation. The key to leveraging adapt the key to leveraging adaptive communication is conscious calibration. Many people with this adaptation use it unconsciously, shifting communication styles without realizing it. But when recognized, it can be strategically deployed to enhance leadership effectiveness. Essential question one must consider is what communication approaches work best in different contexts? How can communication be purposefully calibrated based on audience and objective? How can an authentic connection be maintained across different communication styles? For example, Jason, he's now intentionally prepares multiple communication approaches before essential meetings, considering what needs to be communicated and how it needs to be delivered to different stakeholders. He's transformed an intuitive adaptation into a sophisticated communication methodology. This capacity explains why some leaders connect effortlessly with diverse individuals and navigate complex interpersonal situations with remarkable skill. Their brains constantly adjust to the communication approach based on the feedback from their environment. When consciously directed, this creates significant advantages in team leadership, stakeholder management, and crisis communication. However, like all things, the same capacity can sometimes lead to people pleasing tendencies or inconsistent self presentation without awareness. The power of these three levers lies not just in their strength, but in how they work together. Hyper-Attunement provides the raw data, rapid scenario mapping process that data into potential futures. And adaptive communication translates understanding into practical actions. Together, they create what I would describe as a strategic advantage that's difficult to replicate through conventional training alone. For this reason, I would like for us to take a moment for intentional reflection. If possible, close your eyes for a moment and take a deep breath. Now, I want you to think about the last high stakes situation you faced, perhaps a critical negotiation or an important presentation or a moment of organizational crisis. How did you respond? What information were you picking up that others might have missed? How quickly did you generate potential scenarios and responses? How did you adapt your communication to navigate the situation? Now go deeper, pause. Consider Consider how your early experiences shape these responses. If you grew up navigating uncertainty or challenges, how might those experiences have wired your neural responses to pressure? What specific adaptations did you develop that might now be operating in your professional life? This reflection isn't about dwelling on difficult memories. The purpose is to recognize the adaptive strength you've developed potentially without conscious awareness. For example, your ability to remain calm during chaotic business situations might not simply be personality. It might directly connect to environments where emotional stability was essential. During this reflection, consider the following. What early adaptation might be operating within your leadership approach? Are you consciously leveraging them or are they operating automatically? How might they be more purposefully directed towards your current goal? Remember, transformation begins with awareness. Mastery starts with intentional redirection. Understanding these levers is only the beginning. Now let's examine the practical implementation process step by step because this advantage protocol involves three key phases that transform unconscious adaptation into conscious strategic advantage. The first step involves identifying specific patterns in responding to high stakes situations and tracing them to their adaptive origins. Begin by selecting one pattern you've noticed in your leadership approach. Perhaps you are exceptionally quick at reading room dynamics, unusually adept at anticipating problems, or remarkably skilled at adapting your communication style to a different audience. Then use reflective journaling. In your phone, there's a notepad, black and white composition book, whatever you choose to do. But journal it down. Explore when this pattern first developed and how it served your needs in earlier contexts. For example, an individual with extraordinary ability to detect subtle shifts in team dynamic emerged because childhood volatility made them hyper aware of emotional undercurrents. That same awareness began transformation from reactive hypervigilance to strategic attune. Consider this exercise during your following high stakes situation. Notice your automatic responses. What information are you picking up that others might miss? How quickly are you generating potential scenarios? How are you adapting to your communication? Then ask yourself, where did these capabilities originate? How did they serve you previously? How effectively are they serving you now? The attunement audit requires courage facing connections between current leadership patterns and past survival strategies, which often prove uncomfortable. However, this discomfort precedes breakthrough. Once these connections become visible, they become directable. Additional audit techniques include recording your response to pressure for later analysis, soliciting feedback from trusted colleagues about patterns they notice in your leadership during stress, and then examining recurring themes in your professional strength and challenges. The most powerful insight often emerge from patterns previously dismissed as personality quirks or professional instincts. This crucial step involves consciously redirecting adaptive capacity toward specific strategic objectives. Here, neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize neural connections, become particularly relevant. Dr. Richard Davidson's research demonstrates how intentional practice can repurpose neural pathways, redirecting them toward new applications. For example, if you've developed enhanced threat detection as a protective mechanism, that capacity can be redirected from anxious scanning toward strategic competitive analysis. The neural pathway remains similar, but its application changes dramatically, becoming far more productive and less depleting. A marketing executive demonstrated this principle beautifully. She recognized that her tendency to constantly anticipate potential problems, which often manifested as anxiety, stemmed from childhood economic insecurity. Rather than trying to eliminate this pattern, she redirected it towards scenario planning for product launches, transforming a potential liability into her greatest professional strength. Consider this approach. Take one adaptation identified during step one and ask yourself, how could this same capacity be redirected toward my most important objectives? Be specific about where and how this redirected energy will be deployed. For example, if you notice extraordinary sensitivity to others' emotional state, how might that be deliberately applied to team leadership or negotiation or client relationships? Strategic redirection doesn't involve suppressing adaptive responses, but channeling them toward constructive applications. The neural pathways already exist. They need redirection. This approach proves far more effective than traditional approaches attempting to eliminate something deeply ingrained in one's nervous system. Additional redirection techniques one must consider include deliberate practice, applying adaptive strength in new contexts, creating environmental cues that activate this strength intentionally rather than automatically, and developing measurement systems tracking the impact of redirected capacity. This is the transformation of unconscious adaptation into conscious methodology. The final step involves creating environments and systems that support redirected adaptations while minimizing conditions that trigger productive patterns. The brain rewires through consistent practice in supportive contexts, and this step ensures those conditions exist. For example, individuals with enhanced pattern recognition create information flows delivering appropriate data at optimal intervals. Those performing best under moderate pressure should structure work to maintain optimal stress zones. Those with rapid recovery capacity should develop rituals facilitating efficient setback processing. A technology leader demonstrated this principle effectively. She discovered that she performed best when tackling complex problems within compressed timeframes, a direct adaptation from navigating unpredictable family dynamics during childhood, supporting her natural strength rather than fighting against them. Consider this application. Design one environment modification to help leverage your adaptive strength more consistently. This might involve different meeting structures, new information gathering routines, alternative decision making processes, or recovery rituals following intense work period. The key insight of the Advantage Protocol reveals that transformation does not involve erasing the past, but deploying it more purposefully. The objective isn't to undo neural wiring, but to redirect it toward intentionally created futures. Reinforcement architecture extends beyond individual practice to organizational systems. Leaders can design team structures. Leaders can leverage diverse adaptive strength. Leaders can create meeting protocols, activating optimal thinking state for different team members. Leaders can develop recognition systems reinforcing redirected applications of adaptive capacities. These transform individual adaptation into organizational methodology because the most powerful implementation often involve creating accountable partnership with self first. And if you subscribe with others undertaking similar transformation journeys, regular check ins, shared insights, and mutual encouragement accelerate neural rewiring through social reinforcement, building communities of practice around adaptive strength development. You dig? Before concluding, I would like for us to take one final reflection moment. Close your eyes if safely possible. Visualize your next leadership challenge or high stakes situation. What adaptation have you developed that might be valuable in that situation? How will you consciously redirect it towards your objective? What support systems could maximize their impact? Hold the intention as we approach the conclusion because the intentional visualization creates neural pathways connecting past adaptations with future applications. The brain begins rewiring, creating new associations between adaptive capacities and upcoming challenges. This mental rehearsal significantly increases the likelihood of successful implementation. Consider documenting these insights immediately following this episode. Capture the specific adaptations you recognize, the situations where they might apply, and the implementation approaches you plan. This documentation creates accountability and provides references during future pressure situations when automatic responses might otherwise prevail. You dig? And remember that neural rewiring happens gradually through consistent practice. Each intentional application of adaptive strength creates stronger pathways for future applications. For this reason, one must celebrate small successes and learn from setbacks, both accelerate the rewiring process. Today's exploration covered substantial territory, examining how neural adaptation developed through adversity can transform into powerful strategic advantages through conscious redirection. Remember these key insights. What appears as exceptional leadership intuition Whether reading rooms, anticipating problems, or navigating complex interpersonal dynamics often represent adaptive neural wiring developed through challenging experiences. Through the Advantage Protocol, these adaptations, hyper-attunement, rapid scenario mapping, and adaptive communication can be consciously directed toward strategic objectives. The implementation process, attunement audit, strategic redirection, and reinforcement architecture all provides a framework for intentionally leveraging these adaptations in high stake contexts. You dig? If today's episode provide value, we would appreciate if you share it with someone who would benefit from it. The simplest way to support this show is to subscribe, like the page, leave a message, download, or share it with friends or colleagues navigating their leadership journeys. Join me next week as we wrap up our entire series. We are taking everything we've uncovered about individual resilience and strategic adaptation to the next level. After breaking down how survival wiring becomes an executive edge, we are now going to show how adaptation transforms into real-time boardroom power. We will show what happened when these principles work across an entire organization. Strategic advantage isn't about pretending the past did not happen. It's about deploying it purposefully towards the future you choose to create. Adaptation isn't your limitation, it is your edge. So until next time, keep questioning the norms because the most outstanding leaders aren't born, they are rewired. But before we sign off, I would like to express our appreciation to House of Lone Wolf for supporting this journey. For those ready to turn adaptation into an advantage, visit houseoflonewolf.com. I'm Ibrahim Dafe, and I don't subscribe because truth is rare. You dig? And I'm out.